we're only two hands away from the patient. We may not be clinicians, but everything that we do is going to impact the person that does have the two hands on the patient. And so, remaining that mission driven has really enabled us to be successful.
Welcome to another episode of Data Security Decoded by Rubrik Zero Labs. My name is Rick Bryant. I'm the guest host for this episode. I have over 3 decades of healthcare security and IT experience in both the provider and manufacturing sides of the business, which is why I'm delighted to welcome Anahi Santiago, the Chief Information Security Officer at ChristianaCare, one of the United States' most dynamic healthcare organizations. Anahi brings over a decade of experience in information security, particularly within the healthcare sector. She is known for her strategic leadership in cybersecurity, plays a pivotal role in shaping policies, risk mitigation, and compliance across ChristianaCare's healthcare network. She is also a key contributor in national cybersecurity initiatives through her roles with the Health-ISAC and CISO ExecNet. We had a great conversation on managing the explosive sensitive data growth within healthcare and how she's navigating the ever-changing policy and compliance landscape. But we also got some hot takes about what it's like to live in Philadelphia. Let's dive in, shall we? Hi, Anahi. I'm so excited about this conversation. I've done so much research on you, and I've been very impressed with all the improvements you've made in healthcare security. But I think what we want to do first is kind of have some softball questions, right? Get a little bit of rapport going. I see that you're a Philly native. I have to ask you, Pat or Geno's or none of the above?
None of the above. I'm not a cheesesteak person.
What is the best place? What's the best food in Philadelphia?
Ooh, best food. I think we have one of the best Israeli restaurants in the country. I would say that's my favorite. But that might be a little bit too foo-foo for the audience. In terms of good cheesesteaks, Pat's and Geno's are just tourist traps. Most people, ironically, talk about John's roast pork as having the best cheesesteak. I wouldn't know.
Oh, I'll have to try that next time. I don't like all the tourist traffic at Pat and Geno's either. It's hard to get a sandwich.
Yeah, not a fan.
So, were you born and raised in Philadelphia?
I was not. I was born in Puerto Rico. I came to Philadelphia for college and then just never left.
All right, fantastic. So let's dig into some of the topic of today, right? As you and I both have had extensive experience in healthcare and such a rich background in information security, it seems like we cannot pick up the news today or read an article without seeing some sort of breach within our industry. And with such a rich background in information security across the healthcare institutions, what initially brought you into the field of cybersecurity?
So before moving into cybersecurity, I was a project manager for a large organization, and I ran all of their large infrastructure global projects. And I was a really, really hands-on project manager. So I got to experience like all areas of IT, apps, websites, e-commerce, the infrastructure, all of it. And every one of them had a cybersecurity component to them. And that's just where I gravitated. I kind of fell in love with security. So when it was time for me to move on, it just coincided with Einstein Healthcare Network wanting to hire their very first information security officer, and I, not really having any security background on my resume, I still went for it, and the rest is history.
And what brought you into healthcare? I know I was kind of recruited into healthcare. Not that I had a passion for it until I got into it. What drove you into the healthcare sector?
Honestly, pure luck. I was, at the time, I was complaining about the fact that it was time for me to move on to a friend. That friend happened to work at Einstein and said, they're hiring. And that's how I ended up in healthcare. But honestly, it would take a lot to make me change industries now. I'm pretty passionate about our industry.
What are the most pressing cybersecurity challenges currently facing healthcare systems? And how does ChristianaCare work to mitigate these risks?
For the 12th year in a row, healthcare is seen as the most targeted industry of all industries. And so the biggest challenge is the target that we have on our back and the life safety nature of what we seek to protect. And so the challenges are really around keeping pace with the changing landscape and making sure that our organization understands the risks that we are potentially consuming on any given day, and that we collectively make risk-based decisions about how to protect the organization. And I think the easy answer is, what does that all mean? It means primarily protecting from ransomware so that our systems are available to care for patients. I mean, that is the thing that keeps me up at night.
Ransomware seems to be plaguing the industry. I know myself, never wanting to be a ransomware expert, started warning the industry in the early 2010s because I saw a correlation of high value data, and a lot of it, and a relative low investment in security. And I just thought that was the perfect storm for these bad guys to start attacking our critical care. How do you think that we should prioritize resources to be able to tackle these challenges? And do you feel like ransomware is more of a priority or a bigger threat than other security issues within the industry?
Ultimately, it's all about risk management. Right? Risk management is foundational to all things information security. So it's looking across the organization at and sort of prioritizing the risks that we want to protect from. And I certainly think that ransomware is a major risk to the healthcare industry because it can directly impact patient care and people's lives. And so, I think traditionally, because we're regulated by HIPAA, we've been really focused on confidentiality, where the thing that is really impacting the industry is availability. And by availability, I mean having access to the systems that we need in order to care for patients. I know people used to chart on paper. Nobody knows how to do it without technology.
Yeah, I have to agree. One of the foundations of security has always been about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And yet it seems as though our industry has put a ponderous amount of emphasis on confidentiality. And now we're starting to have concerns about the integrity, especially with ransomware. So pulling all those together has to be a huge challenge. Our latest report from Rubrik Zero Labs largely focused on healthcare data, and that we found that healthcare data is growing fast, roughly faster than any other industry. And out of that, the volume of sensitive information is growing dramatically faster than any other organization in other industries. What are the right ways to think about managing this data growth and its implications?
I think we need to recognize that everything in healthcare is driven by data. And so we have to be really intentional about how we protect that data. But there are strategies such as deduplication, right? We'll probably have the same version of an Excel spreadsheet in 15 different places in the organization, where only one is needed. So it's really governing where data is stored, ensuring that we're protecting those repositories, and having visibility to where we can actually reduce our risk landscape by removing any unnecessary data from our network.
That's wonderful to hear. I have a feeling, in my experience, is that healthcare has a tendency to hoard data. And I get it. I'm a data hoarder too. I probably have the first PowerPoint that I ever had just because I may reflect back on it. And in healthcare, it makes sense because the quality of the data may have hidden treatments. It might have the cure for cancer. But being able to defensively delete that data is, I think, the most effective way to not only manage risk, but to manage the cost. I often ask myself, how are we going to improve the quality and lower the cost of healthcare when our data is growing at 27 to 30% and all these new data sources are coming in with PHI running rampant throughout, and we have to be able to secure and protect it. So I think you're on to an industry leading approach of really understanding the content of your data and defensively deleting it when appropriate and archiving and protecting it appropriately when it is active. Have you looked extensively at ChristianaCare and the life cycle of data, the value of data throughout its useful life?
We have. So we've gone through this effort multiple times, and some of it is, in the name of cybersecurity to ensure that we're reducing our footprint wherever possible. But it's, you can't do that without really understanding not only the data, but how it's being used, why it's needed, the stakeholders that need to inform decisions about what to do with that data. And then certainly making sure that from a destruction perspective, we're being intentional about what we destroy and how we destroy it specifically.
That's fantastic. I love the idea of assigning ownership to the data. And then I think once you assign ownership, you have a tendency to want to protect it more. You mentioned the impact of patient care on the effect of ransomware or bad actors. I personally had that experience where my children were going to Texas Children's and I was responsible for protecting that data. And it made me reflect that, I'm protecting this data for the lifespan of these children, not just mine, but all of them. So it took a personal ownership and a personal passion for me that made the difference. I want to switch to some new data that's coming out. And being a healthcare professional, I understand how sensitive this is. But as part of the Zero Labs report research, we had an interesting conversation with Hannah Prash, a health economist at the University of Minnesota School of Public Health, about how security practitioners and clinicians think about security very differently. How have you fostered a culture of cybersecurity awareness across the different hospitals and clinics within your organization?
So I am very fortunate to work for an organization whose leadership really prioritizes cybersecurity. I mean, I've heard words such as outside of clinical care, cybersecurity is a priority. That kind of leadership has really enabled, permeate a culture of cybersecurity across the organization. I think one of the successful tactics that can be leveraged is our caregivers think about patient safety in everything that they do. I mean, they live and breathe patient safety. And it's very easy to tie cybersecurity to patient safety. So it's almost like it is everybody's job to implement sound cybersecurity, because if we do it poorly, it could affect and impact patient safety. And so that's a messaging that connects with them. They might need to better understand why it's a patient safety issue, but it's quite easy to explain. And if we can start the dialogue there, then the rest of it sort of flows. And, our caregivers want to do the right thing. They're in this industry because of the mission, and aligning that healthcare mission with cybersecurity is, it's important to be able to do that. But also, implementing cybersecurity with the mission in mind is also really important, because we could do certain things that are for the sake of cybersecurity might actually inhibit patient care. So I always remind my team member, we're only two hands away from the patient. We may not be clinicians, but everything that we do, is going to impact the person that does have the two hands on the patient. And so, remaining that mission driven has really enabled us to be successful.
I think that might be the quote of the interview, that getting your organization and fostering an organization of security and responsibility, but more importantly, tying security to positive and good patient outcomes is what drives the mission home. Also along those lines, data that came out of the studies from the University of Minnesota School of Public Health actually illustrated how ransomware causes adverse patient outcomes. And I found this data very compelling, a bit ominous. It's a little bit scary to think that bad actors can cause adverse patient outcomes. But I thought that this would be a very powerful message to send to the industry, to be able to correlate what you've already been able to do at ChristianaCare throughout the entire industry, that security and security events can cause sentinel events. Have you guys looked or had any discussions in your organization about how to improve patient outcomes and how to tie that back to the security mission?
Yes. So one of the things that we've had extensive discussions around is organizational resiliency. So being able to continue to care for patients if and when systems are not available, and the importance of practicing how to be cyber resilient by having downtime procedures, by knowing where those procedures are, by looking at, critical outcomes that we wish to achieve for our patients and what the critical path is to achieve those outcomes and the potential risks of a cyber attack impacting those critical outcomes. And so we've done a lot of mapping and role playing to not only prevent the attack from happening, but recognizing that it could happen, having the capabilities to withstand a prolonged outage by knowing what to do in the face of that outage. Not being surprised by the outage and then having to figure out what to do, but having preparation in place so that the impact is lessened than if we were otherwise not ready.
Well, I think that's the definition and the nature of critical infrastructure. And it sounds like ChristianaCare is doing it right. And that makes me feel wonderful. And as a role model for the rest of the industry, I wish that many more would take those steps. One of the things that starts to correlate when you start to take the leap between cyber attacks or ransomware being a money coster or an inconvenience to it impacting patient care, it makes you wonder as the patients, how willing would you be to go into an organization that was under attack if you know that there's going to be adverse events? And then I wonder how long it's going to take for the industry and the providers themselves to, especially in our litigious society, to say, hey, look, it's more of a risk for me to go in to work at this institution and I could cause harm, and how that would affect staffing levels and how that would affect the ability to recruit the top talent to your organization. I think the security scorecard is going to tie directly to positive patient outcomes and also the ability to be able to recruit. Have you had any conversations like that in your organization?
We're constantly having conversations around, the potential impacts of a cyber attack, the investments that we're making. Are they enough? Are they accurate? Should we pivot given the changes in the threat landscape? How can we partner with our business and clinical stakeholders? Not only to generate the awareness, but create the support systems and engage in conversations, positive conversations, to continue to improve how we deliver care. And to also recognize that the threat actors have to get it right one time. We have to get it right 100% of the time. And that takes a village. That's not just the information security department, but it's all of us. It's every single caregiver. And I think, part of that culture is the recognition that the threat actors are going after people, not necessarily technology. And so being hyper aware of potential threats and being vigilant and reporting and communicating to the information security team when somebody sees something that doesn't seem right, it's really important. And there are conversations that we have on a regular basis.
Fantastic. We're starting to see the federal government step in and take a much more active role. And although I'm not a big fan of unfunded mandates or government overreach, I do think that there's a lot of benefit in providing some clarity around guidelines, regulations, new frameworks, especially for organizations that are tied and responsible as critical infrastructure. As you mentioned, we must be up at the worst times possible and at all times. And with the constant updates in healthcare regulations, how do you see that unfolding over the next 5 years or so?
That's a great question. Late last year, HHS came out with the cybersecurity performance goals, the essential and the enhanced. And at the time, they talked about it being voluntary. that there wasn't a mandate. And that seems to be changing. And so it appears that those CPGs are going to end up in some way or version into law. And so we've been having discussions with the regulators to ensure that they're taking into account the challenges of implementing sound cybersecurity across organizations, and the fact that for large organizations like ChristianaCare, it's easier to invest in a mature cybersecurity programs. But you have a lot of healthcare organizations, specifically providers across the country, that are in underserved areas or are in urban areas where the reimbursement models aren't creating healthy margins for those organizations. So there might be one guy in IT or one gal in IT that's not only just doing cybersecurity, but they're wear many, many different hats. And it's very difficult to implement any version of those CPGs without the resources to do that. And that includes the financial resources. And so, we've been really touting a recommendation around creating a regulatory model like we had with high tech, where, there were incentives. If you implemented EMRs, you got incentives on reimbursement. It worked really well. Why not use a model that worked really well in the cybersecurity realm, where those that are implementing or investing in security get some level of reimbursement that they can actually use to fund the cybersecurity tools that are needed. We're going to continue to push that. I think and I'm not alone when I say we, I'm not even just speaking about ChristianaCare. I'm speaking about the Healthcare Sector Coordinating Council, Health-ISAC, other peers in my organization, Chimes, other advocacy groups that are all recognizing that, yes, there's a really important need to invest in cybersecurity, but unfunded, it won't be successful. Organizations will not be able to meet the law. And so we have to figure out something collectively that's going to work for everybody.
What do you believe the regulators should do to ensure security measures while taking steps not to stifle innovation?
I think that the CPGs are a great start. By CPGs, cybersecurity performance goals. I think that is the right place to begin to align cybersecurity in healthcare across organizations. And in whatever ways possible, the regulators should use those CPGs to advance any kind of regulatory framework that is going to be bestowed on the industry. But like I said, it can't come unfunded. There has to be some sort of support structure for people that want to do what's right to be able to invest in what's right. I'm a member of the Healthcare Sector Coordinating Council, and one specific task group is around the underserved provider community. And the work that we're doing is in really being able to assess what the barriers are and hopefully share those with regulators so that we can align a regulation that recognizes the barriers and hopefully works to remove them, as opposed to just throwing more, greater burden on already burdened organizations.
I think the tough question here really is, with so many regulations already on the books, HIPAA's been out there as cardinal law since 96, Omnibus since 2013. And I feel like a lot of the patients do not believe that the existing regulations are being enforced. Do you feel like more regulations are needed or better enforcement of the regulations that are already in place?
I think we need different regulations. HIPAA, came into effect in 2005. The world looks vastly different than 2005. In fact, the things that are part of the security rule, although risk management is foundational to that law, but malware, passwords, logging activity, like these were rudimentary back in 2005, but now we're dealing with ransomware attacks, denial of service attacks, potential attacks on medical devices that weren't even connected to the network back in 2005. And so I also think we've done ourselves as an industry and as regulators a disservice in that although HIPAA touches on confidentiality, availability, and integrity, it's really focused on confidentiality. And we've all really focused on confidentiality, and that's not what's hurting us. Unfortunately, the things that we hold as sacred, half that information is already out there. Our own patients are putting it out there on social media. And so what's really hurting the healthcare industry is availability of systems. And so we need to align regulations with the existing landscape, not what was in place back in '05. And there is, in the next year to 18 months, we will see a new version of a HIPAA, an updated version of HIPAA. So I'm optimistic that we're not just going to throw more regulations at the industry, but hopefully create complementary regulations to what's already in place to account for the existing threat landscape. Do I think we need more regulations? I don't know that we need more. I think we need different regulations. And in terms of enforcement, it was being overly enforced in the types of fines that were being delivered on organizations. And then, there came updated regulation around if you're following a framework like 405D or NIST, you shouldn't be as scrutinized as somebody that's just blatantly not implemented any kind of a framework or any kind of investments in security. But I just think, and I had this conversation earlier today, the people that are falling to cyber attacks are victims. To find them even more is just to further victimize them. Like, there has to be a balance between enforcement and recognition that some of these cyber attacks are unavoidable, no matter how much you invest in.
That's a perfect transition into the next set of questions. In the wake of the Change Healthcare incident, there's a joint bipartisan bill being put together within the House and the Senate to focus on availability, just as you mentioned. Some of the largest organizations in the country don't have the fundamental availability that's necessary for critical infrastructure. Another piece of that bill is actually encouraging something that you and I are both very passionate about, and that's information and threat sharing. You're a first board member from one of the information security groups to join our program. What do you see as the future industry efforts like the ISACs?
I think that they're essential to the survival of, to the collective survival of the industry. Years ago when HHS first sort of commandeered a group of organizations to conduct an analysis on healthcare cybersecurity, I think one of the top things that was identified is that the industry just was not sharing information. And so after that, there's regulation that came out that gave organizations sort of the ability to share information without fear of retribution. And I think we've gotten a lot better. I've been a Health-ISAC member for many, many years and a Health-ISAC board member for 4 or 5 years. I've lost track, and have seen just an incredible improvement in information sharing, but it's still not enough. We need more organizations to share. We need more organizations to understand what is legally allowed to be shared and what's not. But too many organizations are still too afraid. When they fall victims to attacks, the lawyers step in and essentially block the sharing of critical information that is most valuable during those first 24 hours. And so one of the things that we have impassioned on the White House and the regulators is part of any regulation that comes through needs to somehow intentionally create the mechanisms for people to be able to share information within 24 hours, 48 hours at the most. That's when the information is most critical to be shared across the industry so that others can protect themselves.
Yeah, the first 24 to 48 hours is critical. We're starting to see not only the dwell times within the environment before an attack is launched shorten considerably, but also the turnaround time between a threat and an actual infiltration is shortening. So sharing that information is very critical. And I commend the work that you're doing with the Health-ISAC. How do different organizations in the Health-ISAC network leverage this shared intelligence to improve their own security measures?
So there are various mechanisms to share with Health-ISAC, and all of them include a way to anonymously share information. And certainly, Health-ISAC is committed to anonymizing any intelligence that an organization doesn't want attributed back to them. And so there are automatic feeds that can come from some of the security tools that we employ. There's a threat intel portal where information is shared. There's a Slack channel. It can be done over email. I mean, there are so many different mechanisms depending on an organization's technology stack that can be used to share with Health-ISAC, who will then disseminate across its entire membership. There are also a lot of work underway to work with organizations like CISA to speed up the way that information is declassified so it can get to the membership far more quickly than it already is.
Fantastic. Well, this has just been an excellent conversation. We've developed somewhat of a routine here for the final question. One of the neat things we found when we meet with senior security leaders was that we could examine the long view. As you look ahead, are you more optimistic or pessimistic for the next 5 years?
I am optimistic. I really do. I've been in this industry almost 20 years and have just seen the evolution, not only of the threat landscape, but the collaborative spirit of the healthcare industry and the alignment with its mission and vision. And so I really believe that new technology, new capabilities, programs like Hospital at Home, which are really pushing the boundaries of how we deliver care and how patients consume care. I think all of it has cybersecurity components and requirements. And so it's really going to force us to continue to mature, continue to collaborate, and continue to work as an industry for the sake of the entire industry, not just our collective organizations.
Fantastic. We certainly appreciate your insight and your expertise. And thank you so much for being part of this session. Hopefully, we'll be able to have further conversations in the future. And we really appreciate everything you're doing to help secure our healthcare infrastructure.
Well, thank you for the conversation. It's been a true pleasure.